everybody. I'm so happy to be here in this very difficult time that we're all in. And I just wanted you to know, I like everybody, have been feeling somewhat hopeless and helpless and confused because of the pandemic and the politics of our country. And because I do know a lot about plants and I had taught similar things in the past, I just thought I should use this opportunity to do something to help you all feel like you could do something, because it is everything about this lecture. You can do it. And even if you don't own property, even if you live in a condo or somewhere, you can join up with schools and parks and the city and the county to do some of what I'm suggesting here. So I hope it's optimistic. I hope it's hopeful that we can do something, all of us. That's my goal. And by the way, I want to thank Dana and Audrey and everybody at Cape Fear River Watch for the wonderful work they do. And I'm very grateful to them.
There we go.
Climate change, the enormity of it, the word itself, it's the fires in the Northwest, the floods, the tree blowdown, the rising seas, the overwhelming, unbelievable task of addressing it sometimes leaves us frozen. And so the idea here, this lecture, is to unfreeze us and get us to act now to mitigate and lessen the effects of climate change using trees and shrubs and perennials, mostly trees and shrubs, woody plants, to alleviate this situation and to give us hope that we can do something in our properties to make a difference. Water, we love it. Many of us want to live near it because of the reflection on the surface of the sun and the sky. Also because it has patterns and movement. But the other thing that loves water besides us is wildlife, and it attracts wildlife. And here we see the great blue heron, which is a very popular bird that doesn't live in the water, lives off the water with the fish. And it does not live, it does not nest on the edges, but many things do. And so it's a very important feature in water to have wildlife, and it helps us feel and get much enjoyment from it. In addition to birds that live on or on the edges or off the water, we have things that live in the water like frogs and amphibians. And the problem with that, with modern day life, is that a lot of our water is polluted and they're adversely affected by those pollutants. And one of the things about plants that we'll learn in this lecture, and you already know it, I know you know this, all of you, that plants can mitigate some of that pollution as well as storm problems, because they soak up a lot of the toxins, and that helps us to clean our water systems. The mission or the purpose of this lecture is to give us various design ideas to, as I said, mitigate the effects of climate change, especially the hurricanes, the wind, and the flooding. Additionally, it's to help us design natural habitats for our residents' properties.
Freshwater wetlands.
We're going to talk first about freshwater wetlands. Freshwater just means water that doesn't have salt in it, lakes, rivers, and creeks that do not have salt in them.
Shoreline.
A practice that we do as human beings, we do a lot of practices that are adversely affecting the land. And one is to armor. It's a term used to indicate that we wall off edges of water. We wall them off in the ocean. We wall them off on our properties because we want the best views, nothing to interfere with it. We don't want to lose any edge, so we wall the edge off. But that practice of walling your edges completely is not natural and does not allow for some of the great assets and benefits of a vegetative bordering wetland. And it actually creates a situation where in oceans and in floods, the sand or the silt, instead of being able to move around on the edge to go downstream or upstream or up or down, north or south along the ocean, actually goes out into deep water and gets lost forever. And hence we have to keep renourishing our beaches. We have to bring in, we're losing the erosion is happening much more because of this armoring, walling off the edges. So if you own land, if you have land on any watershed, you should not do this practice. And if you know people who do it, you should work for litigation to stop it.
Natural shoreline riparian zone.
So this is Cape Fear River going closer to the ocean down along River Road. And I had the opportunity to take this picture of the beach, if you will. It's not a real beach, but it is a beach. It's tidal fed river, as we know. And this is a natural, non-armored situation where the vegetation, what we call the vegetative border, is so critical to the life and the continuation of this watershed. So what are some of the things what are some of the plants that we should be thinking about if we own land near a creek or a pond or a river or a lake? We should be putting closer to the water's edge things that, again, hold erosion, and that would be in freshwater, sedges, rushes, and grasses that can take non-salty conditions. And here we're looking at sedge, and its roots hold it in place, hopefully during floods. So when the floods have gone by, the floodwaters have gone by, this is holding the erosion. Greenfield Lake is one of our treasures in the city of Wilmington. And for all of you that know it well, and I'm sure all of you do know it well, and of course Cape Fear River Watch has many events there and classes there and cleanups there. And so it's a very important park to our city, and it's freshwater. And what we're looking at here, and I know you all know this, is two kinds of cypress: bulb cypress, Taxodium distichum, and pond cypress, Taxodium ascendens. And these two trees grow not only on the edge of the water, but as we see here, they grow in the water, actually physically in the water. And very few trees will grow in water. And so those two, pond cypress and bulb cypress, and we're going to look at a third one, are trees that grow in the water and live and thrive in the water. That does not mean you can throw one in the water that's mature that you buy from a nursery. It has to acclimate from birth on, or from early childhood, like first or second year of its life, to anaerobic, meaning lack of oxygen conditions. So this tree is unique in so many ways. These trees, the taxodiums, first of all, they're deciduous. They lose their leaves. And most evergreens that we know, pine, spruces, firs, cypress, all of them, hold their leaves, hold their needles. But these do not hold their needles. They lose their needles. And look at the fall coloration. I mean, it's so stunning, isn't it? It turns this beautiful color, and then it drops its needles, and it produces cones, because it is a conifer. It is actually related to and is in the redwood family. And that means it's related to the redwoods in the Northwest, the tallest tree in the world, Sequoia sempervirens, the coastal redwoods, and the biggest tree in the world, Sequoia dendron giganteum. So it's a relative of theirs. And like them, it's very long-lived. And there was an article in Going Green, I'm pretty sure that was in Going Green, about people that took trips out to the Black River and did a ringing of the tree where they put a little tiny drill, and they don't hurt it. They drill inside the tree, and they're able to count the ages. And they found that our bulb cypress on Black River, there was one that was close to, if not 2,000 years old. So they're very long lived. And we're going to talk a lot about the fact that plants are so unique. We're learning still all the time about plants and trees and all the functions they have and all the ways in which not only are they such a wonderful and unique species, but all the ways in which they actually help us, because the longer a tree lives, it's soaking up that carbon, and it's holding and sequestering that carbon so that we don't have as much carbon. So all trees function like that. All trees are important. Some do it even more than others, but a 2,000-year-old tree has sequestered a great deal of carbon. The other tree we're going to look at is water tupelo, Nyssa aquatica. And I first learned about one of the characteristics of this tree from Sarah Stein, and she's an author, sadly deceased, that wrote Noah's Garden. And we're going to talk about her a little later. But look at this tree. You see it in its fall coloration. It is not a conifer. It doesn't produce cones. It produces fruits. And the fruits that it produces are navy blue drupes, which are like our cherries. Doesn't taste as probably as good as our cherries, but the reason that I'm talking about it in its fall coloration, you see how bright red it is in this slide. It's so bright and it's so early when it changes its leaf color. It's one of the very first trees to turn red in the fall, if not the first tree. I know red maple usually claims this, but this tree turns even before red maple, I've discovered. And when it has that red leaf and the navy blue fruit, birds that are migrating can see it from a high distance in the sky, and they can swoop down and eat that fruit, because that fruit, Sarah Stein educated me on this, is a high lipid, meaning fat, high lipid fruit. And that's wonderful because the birds need, in the spring, they want a lot of insects and sweet things, sugar, to raise their brood and do all the flying around and family details. But when they're flying a long distance, they need fat. And I'm going to mention this a lot because I've picked slides of trees that are high native, all native for the most part, really all native, really. And what these trees and shrubs are so important to our migratory birds that are always under duress because of lack of places for them to land. So Nyssa aquatica, our water tupelo, like the trees that we looked before, pond cypress and bald cypress, grows in the water. And they're the only woody species that really truly grow in the water, not on hummocks, not on other landforms that look like they're in the water, but actually grow in the water. So it's very critical that if you have water and you want to stop the flooding, stop and hold on to the erosion, these are the two species I would recommend: the pond cypress, bald cypress, and the water tupelo. There's many practices we as humans do that are not wise, but here's one practice, and I'm going to talk about design practices that help with flooding, because we're covering flooding. And this is called a rill, R-I-L-L, and I took slides of it in different places so you could see how you could design different rills. Now, if you live in an area that gets flooded and you have water in your property and you don't know what to do with it and it's covering like a lake your property, I would recommend not only do you plant the species I'm going to introduce you to and already have, but I would recommend these practices. You dig a trench, like a ditch, like they have on almost every road, a ditch for runoff water from the street. You're going to dig a ditch on your property for runoff water on your property to channel it, to direct it. And the first one on the sample here shows just a ditch dug in the grass. And then if you wanted to keep it like that, you could plant the edges with grasses that take it wet, and perennials that take it wet, and just leave it like that. And when it's dry, if you think it looks too messy, you just mow it. But that's one idea. Another idea is if you have an edge, and I saw this at Hamilton College in upstate New York, they put a half pipe, a clay pipe cut in half along the edge of a stone dust path. It was porous path, and the water would go over to that and channel it down into a creek down below. Another idea is to dig the ditch and put rocks and stones in it. And if you wanted to do a design that's particularly beautiful other than just a bunch of gravel, you could look at Japanese garden design, because they have really the best ideas for stone design. And get your stones locally, and you don't have to do gravel. You can actually have a very beautiful design layout. And as the water it goes away, then you look down at this beautiful design in the ditch of stonework. So those are rills to channel the water. Where do you take it to? You take it to a rain garden, you take it to an existing creek, you take it to a French drain, or you can just channel it to get it away and off your property so it doesn't pond on your property. Other practices that you can do are putting a rain barrel in. The problem sometimes here is we get so much rain that the rain barrels overflow, but it's always good to capture some of that water and then reuse it on your property during drier periods. Another practice is, and I saw this, and I have quite a few slides here from our museum on Market Street. It's called the Cape Fear Museum, and they have a really interesting and beautiful landscape that they redid about, while I've been living here. So in the last 7 years, they redid the property with a lot of ideas that we can learn from, and I will show you some of them here. And one of them is, when you put down asphalt or concrete, it creates a surface that the rain cannot drain, the water cannot drain. And so instead of putting down a hard surface, you can do a porous. This is blocks that you can buy anywhere, Lowe's, Home Depot, wherever, that have cutouts in them in the shape of a diamond. And when the rain hits that, the water can go to the part that's not a solid surface and drain. There are now concrete that you can buy that's porous. I've seen it. It's pretty ugly. It looks like popcorn that's smashed. I don't know how well it does, but this particular methodology of having a surface you can have for a driveway or a patio, it drains into where it would naturally drain. So it's a very good practice. We're going to talk about shrubs that in particular, and trees. We've already mentioned trees that grow in the water, and we're going to talk a little bit more about trees that grow in bottomlands and bogs, but we're going to also talk about shrubs. And the point here is I'm going to introduce you to shrubs that have an incredible capability of colonizing. What that means is that underneath the ground, in addition to reproducing from seeds, they can reproduce from the ground and sprout up. They sprout up from the ground, and they're colonizers. And the first one I'm going to introduce you to is the alder. The alder, Alnus incana, is a shrub that you see two pieces of it here. And again, this is from Cape Fear Museum on Market Street. And they planted alder near the edge of a trench, a big area they dug out that's during flooding going to become, it was a huge rill, if you will. It wasn't a real rill because they're more like a ditch. This was a huge cutout area where they went down deep and planted the edges so that the runoff water from their site would go into this big, really a low-lying pond. It could pond. It has a capability to pond. I haven't seen it pond, but I've been watching. So the alder, here we see it to the right with its fall seeds. The seeds are little cone-like structures with lots of little seeds. And then to the left shows you the leaves on the tree, on the shrub. One thing I want to say about alder is in my readings and in my studies, I found that it's almost invasive because it colonizes and it's so aggressive. I was seeing it in a reclamation area at Wellesley College in Massachusetts, and the landscape architect had spec'd it out to hold down the erosion, and they put it right on the edge and in the water. And sure enough, within about 2 or 3 years, all you could see was alder everywhere. I mean, just so much alder. And it was actually filling in the wetlands. It was actually growing in the wetlands, filling it in. And that was almost a problem because the wetlands were serving a function. And then if they filled them in, it would become a forest, etc. So it is almost invasive, but luckily along came beavers and they harvested tons of them for their beaver lodge, but still, no matter how much they harvested, more grew. So just be careful when you pick plants that produce a function, form a function. Sometimes they can have a mind of their own and reverse some of what you want to do. Another plant that grows in the wetlands called buttonbush, Cephalanthus occidentalis, a native shrub. And the name buttonbush is because the flower is like a big button and the fruit's like a big button, has that capacity to colonize. I was introduced to this plant at the Arnold Arboretum in Massachusetts. That's where I had my career. And I just loved it because it's so kind of Dr. Seussy looking. But then when I was kayaking one day on the Charles River, I discovered a huge massive buttonbush going on for yards and yards, all massed along the edge of the Charles River, holding erosion, operating as a vegetative border for mitigating, pollutants and absorbing pollutants. And I just couldn't believe it was in like 2 or 3 feet of water, living, thriving in this water. And I just was amazed by it. So buttonbush is a critical plant to consider for wetland edges to hold and absorb water and soak it up. Florida, we all know our dogwoods, right? We all know our pretty Florida dogwoods, but this dogwood is a shrub dogwood and there's many species. And instead of always considering buying, camellias, boxwood, whatever it is you like to buy, this native shrub, there's many species of this native shrub. 2 grow right in the wetlands, but a lot of them do besides those 2. This is gray dogwood, Cornus amomum. And if you look at it here, there's 2 pictures. One is with the fruits and one is with, or is it only one picture? It's one picture. I am kind of blind. Those of you that know me know that about me. And Audrey Dunn is helping me so that I memorize what I'm going to say, but I can't always see what I'm saying. Or I don't need to see what I'm saying. I need to see what I'm talking about. Anyway, so Cornus amomum is gray dogwood. And it's distinguishable from the other dogwoods because at the base of its fruit are red stems, and that's unique to the gray dogwood. So if you see a dogwood like that, now again, it's a high lipid, and I mentioned this to you before that I'm going to talk to you a lot about high lipid fruits for migratory birds. So it not only provides food for the birds, it provides the fat that they need to make their migration. And that's true of other dogwoods that are native. There's one called silky dogwood. There's the red twig dogwood that you all know. Many of you that buy the variegated form, that's a European form. But I'm just telling you that the natives function with the high lipid fruits and they produce more fruits. And I'm not saying never buy a non-native. I'm just saying so many natives give so much benefit to the environment, and it's very wise to have a practice of using them and knowing what they can give to us. So everybody knows the red maple. They're planted. I see them everywhere. I see them on the right of way between the sidewalk and the street. I see them at Martin Luther King Park. If I want to look at a maple, all I need to do is go out my door. Now, they're not planted as much as crepe myrtle, which is a non-native that's overplanted. And if you never plant another crepe myrtle, you'll have my blessing, because it's way overplanted, and its function and for wildlife and for everything is really not high at all. It's very low. But red maple actually has a very high wildlife function for mammals, for birds, and it does have an incredible capacity to live where it's extremely dry. And when I knew this about it, it can take it dry, but it also creates red maple swamps in New England. I haven't seen them down here, but when I was kayaking, when I first moved here, I got a chance to kayak, and I saw all along the edge in the fall, red maples growing with saw palmetto underneath it. So clearly it was on the edge of the lowland of the creek. We were on a creek, and it was functioning to do everything I say they do. Pull up the water so that it's not flooding, hold erosion, and then it has all these other functions for wildlife and shade, but it also takes it dry. So in Massachusetts, a lot of urban designers started putting it in containers as a street tree where there was no cutout in the sidewalk, just literally putting the container, a big container, probably an 80-gallon container, and throwing the tree in it. And believe it or not, they lived for quite a few years in a container, who would think? But red maple, Acer rubrum, and then another tree that forms swamps is called Chamaecyparis thyoides, which is Atlantic white cedar, and that grows down here, and it looks like a juniper, eastern red cedar. It looks like it, but the eastern red cedar, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, has a berry-like cone that's blue, and we all know it, the blue fruit, but it's really not a fruit, it's really a cone, but it's called a fleshy cone. There's a lot of these things because we have to categorize everything as humans, and not everything falls into our exact categorization. But this tree, Chemaecyparis thyoides, Atlantic white cedar, forms swamps. And the one I know about well is out on Cape Cod at Wellfleet, the cedar swamp. So it grows in like red maple in swamps, but it's not, to my knowledge, the same function as the two species, the Nyssa aquatica, the tupelos, and the bald cypress that grow literally in the water. These grow, I think, on hummocks, but I'll have to research that. But anyway, this tree is an evergreen conifer, and it forms swamps. It forms a wonderful function to hold erosion, and it looks good too. It's a very handsome tree, but it can also grow in drier areas. So even if you don't have water on your property, you can plant this. If you don't want to always plant a juniper, you can plant this tree. The next thing I want to talk about are willows. And willows are always seeking water, and we have many species. Most people are familiar with a weeping willow, which is non-native. It's Salix ex babylonica, so it's non-native, but if you love it, that's fine, plant it. I'm not going to judge you at all. I just think, well, if you're going to plant the weeping willow, plant some of our native willows. We have shrub willows, you know, pussy willows and many willows, but do not, and I stress this, do not plant them around your house where the water pipes come out, the sewer and the water pipes come in, the water bringing to your house, because they seek water. And if you plant it, and how do you know where those pipes are? Well, ask, just go outside and look for, you know, where the city meter is, and you'll know that's where it's going into your house. But do not plant them on the foundation of the house. Put them out, way out in the yard, away from any pipes, because they will crack your pipes, and this has happened. So willow really pulls up a lot of water. It's very good for erosion. It's very good for mitigating flooding, and there's many forms of it and many types, and I would recommend it most highly. Now, a plant that I didn't know about this plant until I started teaching plant material, and it's called spice bush, Lindera benzoinen. And it grows down here. It's a it grows in low-lying areas, in boggy areas, so it takes it wet, and it has these beautiful yellow flowers in the early spring. And it functions to both absorb water and to help with early pollinators. We've heard often that terminology, early pollinators, various pollinators, mostly the bees that come out in the spring, need things to pollinate. So this is one of the very important plants for early pollinators. And it's also in the laurel family, so its leaves are extremely fragrant. I don't think you can use them in cooking, but they do smell like bay laurel. It smells just like it, and it's incredibly lovely smell. And then in the fall, the fruits turn bright red. Well, you don't always see them because the leaves are bright, beautiful, warm yellows. And that is another high lipid fruit. So it functions on the watershed. It takes water edges. It grows in boggy areas. It takes it wet. Early pollination, and the red fruit is for high lipids for the birds that are migrating. This is why I mentioned natives. I know that a lot of people talk about natives. Well, why? But because they have so many functions in our environment down here on the coastal fringe. All right, sweet pepper bush, Plethora ulnifolia. This particular bush comes in many forms. This is a pink form. It's not its natural form. Its natural form is to have a white flower. And I always worry when they hybridize things to be pink, because they might lose their scent. And the whole beauty of this is the scent of it. It blooms in late summer, and it blooms through the fall, and it's very fragrant. And I am the kind of person that loves to swim in open fresh water, and I can smell this in bloom when I'm swimming. I just lift my head up and, oh my gosh, Clethra's blooming somewhere around here. Somewhere there's a Clethra. Well, they have dwarf forms of it. Down here, Plethora ulnifolia can probably grow roughly 10 to 15 feet. Everything grows taller down here. Oh, by the way, that earlier slide, the Lindera benzoinen, the spice bush, Up north, that gets about 15 feet. Down here, it probably would get 30 feet. And it's a multi-trunk shrub. It's really not considered a tree, but again, it's a human construct to classify things. Some things we call a tree, some things we call a shrub, and we identify them by, okay, if you're a shrub, you're multi-trunked and you're under 30 feet. If you're a tree, you're single-trunked and over 30 feet. And we'll see that that is something that we'd like to be true all the time, but it's not. Okay, winterberry is a holly, but it's a deciduous holly. We know our hollies down here to be mostly evergreen, and they are mostly evergreen. And if you don't know this about holly, I'll tell you, you probably do know it, because you always want the red fruit in the winter, and it takes two to tango. You have to have a female bush and a male bush. So that terminology and scientific terminology is dioecious, meaning two. It takes two to tango with the hollies. So this is the deciduous holly, meaning it loses its leaves in the fall. And I'm in love with this shrub. It grows in wetlands, and all throughout New England, Massachusetts, and down here, it grows in wetlands. But does that mean it can never grow in drylands? No, it can also take it dry, but it's found in its natural habitat is wetlands. So ilex, which is the word for holly, the scientific term for holly, verticillata. Now, why am I showing off and doing all my Latin? Well, because trees and shrubs are given these names, and then they're given common names. And the common name for like the shrub or the tree we saw earlier called Atlantic white cedar, it's not a cedar. A juniper virginiana, our junipers, eastern red cedar, it's not a cedar. Many things are called cypress, they're not cypress. So cypress grow in the Mediterranean, like in Greece. Cedars, the four true cedars, grow in Asia Minor. And so everything's called a cedar, and it's not a cedar. And everything's called a cypress, and it's not a cypress. So if you give them only common names, there's no guarantee you're going to get the right plant. It was Carl Linnaeus that created the binomial system of naming plants, scientific names, genus and species, but it helps us in the field to make sure we're getting the right plant and make sure we're talking about the right plant, because I think just with longleaf pine, I believe there's over 30 common names for longleaf pine. Okay, so what am I telling you about in this slide is that the winterberry that blooms, it grows in the wetlands, fruits in the winter, it's fall actually, but unlike a lot of the high lipid fruits, it overwinters and it freezes and thaws, and isn't all eaten by the birds. So the overwintering birds would benefit from the Ilex verticillata, our deciduous holly that has the fruits all winter or for a great deal of the winter. And I took this slide in Sherburne, Massachusetts, and it was a swamp boggy area, and you can see it grows right in the wetlands. Okay, our last one that we're going to cover, and actually I somehow missed showing you one that I'm just going to talk about really quickly. You don't have a picture of it right now. It's the Zambucus canadensis. This is not it. This is Aronia arbudifolia brilliantissima. But I meant to put the slide in for elderberry. And elderberry is one of those, again, grows in the swamps, grows in the slightly drier area, but really prefers the low-lying areas, just like this Aronia arbudifolia. And the reason I mentioned the elderberry here is I've seen it down here in different places and different locations, and you can get it in the nursery. Again, it's the one I'm not showing you now, the Zambucus canadensis, the elderberry. It has a dark, inky fruit. It has pretty white clusters of flowers, a corm, and it's one I would highly recommend, and you can get it in the trade. Aronia arbudifolia brilliantissima is a beautiful tree that grows on the edges of water, not in the water, and it's another one I'd recommend. I could recommend more, such as shad bush, amelanchiers, but it's just, there's a limit to how many I can name, but I'm naming the really ones that give you the most bang for your buck, and this one has got beautiful fall color, red, bluish fruit in the spring. It's in the rose family, and they've even named one after Princess Di. Okay, river birch is as its name implies, grows near rivers, doesn't grow in the rivers, but grows near them. Now, this is one that isn't the natural feature of river birch, Betula nigra. Betula is the genus for birch, nigra is the species for river birch. Why didn't they name it Rio? Don't ask me, but anyway. This grows as a multi-trunked, 80-foot tree along river edges. But when you buy it in the trade, you can buy it either as a clump form, multi-trunk, or as a single stem, which is called a standard in the trade. So you can get it either way. And I'm just mentioning it here because it's so available in the trade. You can't go anywhere without seeing this tree. It grows in shopping centers everywhere. Everybody's got river birch. It has the exfoliating bark like our paper birch up north, but it's orange underneath. But with age, and everything changes with age, that beautiful white orange, that orange underside of the exfoliating bark, turns brown. But if you look high up in the tree, the new growth always will have that orange. One of the features of this, and I mentioned the birds a lot, we're all crazy about birds in this world. And this tree produces dry seeds. In the winter, they're called catkins. They hang down and they drop to the ground, and it provides food for the birds in the winter, which is very important, as we know. So brackish water is water that's salty. It doesn't necessarily mean ocean water. A lot of our river water with a lot of the dredging has become more brackish. It means water that has salt in it, not necessarily pure salt like the ocean, but salt. And there's a number of plants that grow in brackish water, but not nearly the number that grow in fresh water. Fresh water, I could just talk about that forever, but salt water, no. And if you live on the beach, really the only thing that grows really close to the ocean is the beach sands, the beach grasses, and a few perennials, and maybe a juniper horizontalis or something, but very little. That's why we get these great views of the ocean, because no woody trees are growing there. But brackish water does have woody trees that grow in. I want to tell you about some of them. You can read this list, and I could have Audrey read it, but you'll read it because I'm going to talk for a minute about what's on it. There's two hollies that grow in brackish water, and you all know the Yaupon holly. By the way, there's a form of Yaupon holly that cascades down, and it's much more attractive than just the regular one. So if you get a chance to buy the Ilex, which is the name for holly, vomitoria, which is this gross species name for Yaupon holly, vomitoria, you can get the one that weeps down. It's really, really stunning. Another holly that grows in brackish water that's native is Ilex, meaning holly, opaca, which is the American holly. It gets really, really tall. It has very spiny, shiny leaves, but it's a pyramidal form that gets, and there's many, many, many species of this. Not species, cultivars. Like 300 cultivars of Ilex opaca. They have one that has yellow. Why have yellow fruit? But they have one that has yellow fruit. I wouldn't do that because who knows that the birds will ever eat it. But those two hollies grow in brackish soil. And then our native palm trees, the saw palmetto and the dwarf palmetto, grow in brackish soil. And our beautiful magnolia grandiflora, grows in brackish water. And you can keep going on the list for the perennials and the shrubs that grow there, but I'm just mentioning these because it's a limited list. So this is going to be available to you online. After this lecture, they'll explain here how to download these things and get these lists.
We'll put it in the chat.
It'll be in the chat. That's Audrey. Thank goodness for Audrey. I couldn't do this without Audrey. Okay, so one of the plants that we see when we walk to the beach, at least I do, whether it's Carolina Beach or Curry Beach or Wrightsville Beach, I see these flowers, and these are blanket flowers, Gaillardia, and they actually are native. They can grow where it's not beach, but they like it's sharp drainage, but all the drainage down here is pretty much sharp drainage anyway. And it's blanket flower, and it's so beautiful, and it seeds in everywhere, and it's a perennial along with some salvias, which are sages, that grow in sandy brackish water. Another plant, and this is the inkberry that grows in brackish water, is Ilex glabra. Right? Sorry, I've memorized everything I'm saying here, and sometimes I'm falling short. But Ilex glabra or glabra, by the way, it's a snobby thing. You can do your A's short or long. Now, the English do it long, and then the Mediterranean people, like in Italy, and they do it a short A. So glabra, glabra, verticillata, verticillata, potato, patata. But the English are very snobby, and they think everything has to be pronounced the way they say it. There's a wonderful teacher, educator, perhaps a lot of you know him, Michael Durr, associated with the University of Georgia, Atlanta, wrote all the books I used for teaching, and he had his own pronunciation guide, and that's my man that I use for my pronunciation guide. And if you have a beef with how I pronounce things, take it up with Michael Durr. All right. So Ilex glabra is a holly, again, blue fruit. Hardly ever see it. Evergreen, grows in brackish water, and also grows in non-brackish water, grows up north. I use it a lot as a foundation plant. There's many forms of it. There's many cultivars, and I just think it's stunning and beautiful. So beautyberry, I took this picture this fall, and Audrey helped me pick. I took a lot of them, the best one. Beautyberry is the one we all fall in love with. There's one outside here in the rain garden. It doesn't just take brackish water, it'll take fresh water, obviously. Nothing likes brackish water, to be honest with you. Nothing like, oh, wow, salt in my water. No, they just survive there. But so beautyberry has these, what I would call fluorescent purple berries in the fall. And this is, again, the museum, Cape Fear Museum, on the other side of the road that leads you in there from the back side of the museum. And they put this garden in. Sherry O'Donnell, who's with the garden club and also was with, still is with Alliance for Cape Fear Trees, helped plant it and took me to it a few years ago because it's right in my neighborhood. So this is planted with Rebecca's, which are black-eyed Susans of many forms. There's many types of black-eyed Susans. And then the blue plant, the blue perennial off in the distance, that's blooming in the fall, is blue mist. It's a eupatorium, and it's a native perennial that doesn't take brackish soil to my knowledge, but it looks very beautiful here with the beautyberry, with those amazing purple fruits that are so stunning. And there are many cultivars of this too. So if you don't want things that get really big, you can get dwarf forms of almost everything these days that's a shrub. I can't tell you how many dwarfs are out there. Okay, now I'm just showing you these slides because this is along the Cape Fear River. This is a natural vegetative wetland. This is the way, if you own land on the river, if you own land on a creek, if you own enough land, this is the important border you should be allowing to live. And if it's not, they're installing it with native grasses, with native sedges, with shrubs like wax myrtle, which takes it brackish, by the way. I forgot to mention wax myrtle. Ilex verticillata, the winterberry, which I've seen growing down there. So this is the way it should look. And this is what you can do to have something that keeps the soil in place during floods. And here's another picture. So as you move away from the marsh, you can go into woody trees and shrubs, and the ones we mentioned, the bulb cypress, et cetera, Nyssa aquatica, the tupelo, are ones that are very recommended for the edges. What's it?
Fisher Point.
Oh, Fisher Point. Okay, so Fisher Point, we all know where that is. It's down on the water. And what a mess this looks like, right? Because this is just a real naturalized area. And that other area was naturalized too. But this is Yopon holly. You can't even see it through all the, and juniper with all the vines growing up it. And by the way, on my property, when I don't weed, that's what I have. Everything's covered with vines. So, I mean, you don't have to have this messy look to have a natural habitat. You can have, what's this?
Bald head.
You can do what Bald Head does, which is they have the live oak, and we'll be talking about that in a minute, and they have understories of shrubs that are all native. You can plant a look like this.
Designed for hurricane.
Okay, we're going to move on for a second here, and I'm just going to check with, how much time do we have?
It's 11:25 right now.
Just a minute.
We started, I guess, at around 10:40.
All right, so I got to keep moving a little faster. Part of this lecture is how to design for wind. And I use this book that I used with my students years ago, how to funnel wind, how to channel wind. Now, obviously here, the hedgerows funnel the wind towards the house for cooling in the summer. But more importantly, I want to talk about how to deal with forceful winds on your property. And I'm going to talk about species that are good for that to plant, but it's the layout that's critical. So here we see just sort of a wall, like a hedgerow, and then the wind goes up and then it comes straight down and it doesn't diffuse the wind. Whereas if you do a planting on your property of zigzag grove of trees, planting the smaller trees to the front, the more shade tolerant trees to the back, then the wind comes into that grove and it gets diffused by the grove, as you can see in this slide on the bottom picture. Longleaf pine is one of those trees. Now, pines generally are very shallow rooted, but longleaf pine is very deep rooted. And you can see it in its juvenile form over to the left, and it stays in that form for years and years and years, developing a root system. And the roots can go down, according to the head of the tree commission, Dr. Dick Gregory, they can go down 40 or 50 feet through the sandy soil. And then over to the right is showing longleaf pine planted at Cape Fear Museum as a juvenile form of it. But if you want, don't plant slash pine or Pinus tata, loblolly pine. If you have hurricanes near your house, plant longleaf pine. Now it needs sun, so it's got to go to the front, but it'll take forever to establish those long, deep roots. And here's a longleaf pine is unique among the pines in that it forms plantations and a savanna. And here's a savanna of naturalized longleaf pines with an understory of about 150 native shrubs and grasses that grow with it and are associated with it. So here's an idea for you. And the other tree that tolerates those winds, here's an old ancient live oak, Quercus virginiana, or is it Virginicus? Virginiana, it's Quercus virginiana, I get a little confused. This, again, has deep, deep roots. It's a hardwood, it's long-lived, and it's great for hurricanes, and it takes some shade. So those two species are the ones I would recommend for deep roots and for planting on your property if you want shade trees and trees that won't hopefully snap or blow over in a hurricane. I can't guarantee it, but they'll do better than like laurel oak or some of the other oaks. So habitat is another, in my final sort of discussion here with you. I did a habitat design at a school for a neighbor of mine a year ago in November, where they didn't want, the county wouldn't let me plant tall things, so I used all our native things. But the idea is that trees do not grow by themselves exclusively. They grow in a community. We know that now. They're communal. They have understory and they have herbaceous, and they produce needle drop or leaf drop that supports the soils. And that's why you shouldn't rake up everything every year, because your soils aren't being supported. So habitat is about creating an environment where things are naturalized and can keep successfully reoccurring. And this school that I did it, so if you live in an apartment, if you live in a condominium, you can get involved with school plantings, but not just trees, but habitats. So see me if you're going to do it, and I'll help you work out a plan for it. Okay, so when you're designing, you need to know certain variables. What's a microclimate? What's the topography? Well, here we're hot and humid. Our topography is sharp drainage soil. We're not the Piedmont. We're not the mountains. You need to know about soil type. Well, I just said it's sandy. And what else? Let's see. Hydrology, which is the water. Of course, it's always water defines everything. Okay, so here is, as it says on the slide, here is Chapel Hill. Chapel Hill, if you get to visit it, I really highly recommend a field trip to Chapel Hill. They have 3 native habitats. One is coastal fringe, which we are. The other is Piedmont, which is in the middle of the state, and the other is mountainous, which of course is the mountains, the Smoky Mountains, Appalachian Mountains. So here we see a beautiful planned natural habitat of our trees and shrubs and perennials and grasses. That this is this is, to me, would be the goal of all of us. So if you want to get ideas, you can go to Chapel Hill. I've got 2 slides of it, so you can see how stunning it is. That's Chapel Hill too. And now we're going to look at the Piedmont, going to the, actually it's almost up in the mountains. This is the topography for that area. I'm not going to talk about that area. I'm really just talking about our area, Wilmington, and its other area, outlying areas, the coastal fringe. A designer and a layout system that I adopted very young was created by an English designer, very renowned plantsman. He introduced many, many perennials to us, Alan Bloom. And he created these gardens that float in the middle of your yard. Now, these are not gardens that mitigate wind or water. They're just decorative. And his son, Adrian Bloom, who I got to meet, did a similar look using conifers. So both of them are island bed designers that I stole from and started doing. So if you have a property in Wilmington with blank spaces in front and areas that you can start to think about island beds, you could do something very simple like a hedge of native bushes that take some shade and plant it with trees that can take some wind velocity. You can, I can't see what, Noah's Garden. Noah's Garden is Sarah Stein, whom I said I would mention in this lecture. Sarah Stein wrote this book, Noah's Garden, and then she wrote Planting Noah's Garden, which I didn't like as much, to be honest with you. But Noah's Garden is a brilliant assessment of how to help mitigate species loss of all mammals and birds and all. She's the one that taught me about the Nissa, bringing the high lipid fruit. And this is one of her designs in her books. And you can see the house, and you can see it's surrounded first by various smaller gardens going around to the periphery of larger and more what I would call a green corridor. And what I want to tell you all is get along with your neighbors. Learn to get along with your neighbors and start forming neighborhood groups that will allow you to each plant on the edge some of these corridors. And if your neighbor plants it, suddenly you have a corridor of green running through the neighborhoods that will help with flooding, help with blowdowns, help with species loss, help with species, resources to give animals, birds, insects, something to go to. And this can be done. We can do this. This is something we can do today. We can meet our neighbors. We already know our neighbors. I know they're all afraid of trees blowing down. My neighbors don't want any trees that will blow down, so use understory trees. You can do this. Okay, so I wanted to show you where I did it. This is in my neighborhood where I raised my kids in Natick, Massachusetts. This is an island bed near a street. You can see the labels. There's sickle pear, there's low bush blueberry, there's Acusa dogwood, which we took from a foundation of one of the city buildings they were tearing down. And then if you keep going, we have Fothergilla gardenia, which is a southern Fothergilla. The common name is Fothergilla. It's a stunning fall color. It's in the witch hazel family. Witch hazels can be used. I planted a sickle pear. I do something that Evan Folds has been talking about, which is planting fruiting things in public spaces so people can have food to eat, not just pecans or nut trees, but really fruiting trees, cherry trees, apple trees up north, pear trees, and down south, you can do plums. You can do any number of things in schoolyards and public gardens where people can harvest the fruit. But it's an island bed planting, layering the look. This is my yard, and I have a little tiny yard, but it's not so tiny for 8th Street. It's tiny for anybody else, but downtown hardly anybody has any property, and I have a little extra area to plant in. So I am planting mostly natives, but not exclusively. Oak leaf hydrangea is not a floodplain plant, but what a stunning hydrangea that will really look good in your yard. They have many forms of it again, if you want a dwarf form. Beautiful fall color, white big panicles of flowers. Sweet olive. This one that I'm showing here, Osmanthus fragrans, is an Asian form, but if you do the Osmanthus americanus, I think is the way it is said, that is for brackish soil. I forgot to mention that, brackish soil, but it's also for dry soil. But these Osmanthus are blooming in the fall and winter. They're so fragrant, so stunning, and an evergreen and very handsome. And do not plant, I'm sorry, I'm going to tell you what not to plant, but don't plant the ilex, the Japanese don't plant the Japanese privet. Oh my God, I forgot the botanical name, but Japanese privet sold everywhere. It's hedged everywhere. It has those blooms that look like lilacs and are fragrant, but it's highly invasive, doesn't give anything back. Go with this type of plant instead, the osmanthus. Important feature in designing and planting is to plant rare and endangered species. And this is the Benjamin Franklin tree, named after Benjamin Franklin by the Bartram father-son team, John and William, John the father, William the son, Bartrams that lived in the 1700s. Before the Revolutionary War, they were collecting plants and mailing them to Kew Gardens in England and all over the world, but mostly England and Europe, for plant collectors. And they found this rare plant on the Altamaha River in Georgia, which wasn't even a state then. So they just found it along the coast there. And it's named after their friend and colleague, because they lived and their farm and their nursery was in Philadelphia, and it's still there and you can go visit it. It's an historic site now. And they named this after their friend, Benjamin Franklin. So it's called Franklinia. And it has a flower like a camellia, but it blooms in the late fall. And in Massachusetts, where I studied it, it bloomed in November and December. And it looks like a camellia, and it colonizes, and it's a little hard to get established, but it's rare and endangered. It actually was collected by the Bartrams and then went forever extinct after that. And so it's the only way it lives is through the nursery trade. So plant this and consider planting other rare and endangered species. I think we're running out of time, right?
It's 11:37. So yeah.
So we got like a few seconds here, so I'm going to rush like I always do at the end. So habitat gardens, this is the one I did for the schoolyard. And what I did was I planted junipers, I planted what you call cedars here. The name is Thuya occidentalis. And it's a evergreen shrub that a lot of people use for their foundations. I did the dwarf Magnolia grandiflora. I did the beautyberry. I did to the right the really important habitat plant and absolutely stunning Castanea. What's the botanical name?
It's the red buckeye.
The red buckeye, thank you. Castanea carnii. That is a very important butterfly plant also for larvae. And so this thing that I put in the ground, and I haven't been able to visit it post-planting because of COVID and everything, but I did a lot of muhly grass and salvias and a lot of, so this is a habitat garden at a schoolyard that had nothing but grass. Now look at, they're gonna have birds and butterflies and bees, and don't mention the bees. They said, I promised them there'd be no bees. Okay.
Wilmington backyard.
This is my backyard, and I did, is it the Florida dogwood?
It's the smooth wither rod.
Oh, smooth wither rod. Thank you so much, Audrey. So smooth wither rod is a viburnum that's native, and we have a lot of native viburnums, so please consider using these. It's a beautiful shrub. It has the most stunning fall color, and I'm into fall color because I love the fall color. We don't have a lot of it here, but if you want to create a sense of New England in Wilmington, consider these plants I'm talking about for their fall color. So smooth wither rod is a viburnum. There's 7 native viburnums, and please consider this one. I was waiting for the fruits to turn their beautiful native navy color, but it didn't do it in time. So this is from my yard. Here's another picture of my yard. It's my house is to the right. It's only about not even 20 feet, probably literally 15 feet. And you can see I planted a Florida dogwood, but I do have a camellia, and I have a Yopon holly, and I have the osmanthus, the sweet olive tea, et cetera, et cetera. So this has become a habitat for tons of songbirds because they like the edge.
Fringe tree.
Fringe tree. This photograph I got from the Arboretum, thanks in the courtesy of Susan Brown, who teaches their plant courses, and she teaches a whole Master Gardener program there. And I asked her if she had a slide of their fringe tree because I didn't get a picture of it. This is a native tree. To the right, you'll see the flowers, so fragrant, so amazingly fragrant in the summer. And to the left, the size of it, it's a big multi-trunk tree, but it's not going to blow over in a storm. To my knowledge, it's been at that Arboretum quite a while, and I haven't seen any damage due to winds. So this is something you can consider as a habitat tree that's quite beautiful and underused, in my opinion. Don't put a crepe myrtle in, put a fringe tree in. Okay. tulip tree. This is just a native tree that is in almost everybody's yard or a lot of people's yards. And a lot of people are like, oh gosh, that tree's so big and it drops all this stuff and I got to rake it up every fall. Well, those leaves are wonderful for composting. So consider, if you have a tulip tree, don't take it down. Prune it up if it's too much for you, but leave the leaf litter and compost it. And lastly, I talk a lot about birds. This is the northern goshawk. One of my students raised one and sent me this slide. Because if you design for the birds, you design for all life on Earth. I mean, the goshawk needs deep, deep woods. The songbirds need edge, along with the bluebirds. There's birds that need grasslands because they nest in the ground. So there's many, many, many things you can do for the birds that will be for insects and for all of life. And lastly, the slide that talks about the adage, do no harm. And I'm not saying I haven't done harm, because I did herbicide things in my lifetime. I'll be honest with you, I used that horrible Roundup, trying never to use it again. But sometimes you absolutely have to use it for certain invasive vines, etc. But as you can see, and Audrey will read this for me.
Take nothing but memories, leave nothing but footprints.
Yeah, that's an old adage that you've probably heard, and I stole from something that I did with, I think it was actually when I went down the Grand Canyon on a rubber raft, and that's what they told us when we camped out, that we could only leave our footprints. So that's the end of our lecture, and we'll be followed by questions. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm going to stop the share and
Hello. Can y'all hear me? Just give me a nod. All right, can y'all hear me? Yeah? Okay. Thank you so much, Kate. I'm giving you a hand. I think that was amazing. I can't fathom how you remembered all of that. And it was so beautiful and so helpful, and I so appreciate it. I'm going to take a look at chat. Normally I'm able to watch the chat and watch the participants during the meeting, but since we recorded it, it was a little different. So I'm going to take a look at the chat and see if there's questions in there. Meanwhile, please, if you have a question, unmute yourself and go ahead and ask Kate.
Kate, this is Bridget. I have a question. You said most of these native plants are available in dwarf size, because I live downtown as well and have a very small yard. So can't put like a big bush, or do you just buy a regular bush and trim it so it stays small?
Yes, hi, thank you for your question. Yes, you can buy many of the ones, maybe not rare things or hard to find things, but most of the ones that I mentioned in the way of shrubs come in dwarf forms. And you got to just shop around. I live near, and I shouldn't plug them, but I'm going to Transplanted Garden. They can order things for you, or just see me. I live on 8th Street. I'm happy to talk plants with anybody. And I can tell you, which dwarf ones are that I particularly like, but there's almost everything now comes in dwarf form. Almost all the perennials now come in compact. Annuals, everything's dwarfed. Yes.
Perfect. I live close to you because I'm on 9th. So
come by. I shouldn't tell everybody, but what
just, you could put your, maybe you could have an email address you could share.
do you want to share your email?
Yeah. Oh, goodness.
I'll put it up. I'll write it in the chat, Bridget.
Thank you.
And also there are some folks on Facebook, and I did put in the chat on Facebook. If you can hear me now, there is a slight delay on Facebook. Feel free to post your questions in the comment field on Facebook, and I'll relay them to Kate. Any other questions here on Zoom? Feel free to unmute yourself. And if you want to show your face now, please do. I'd love to see everybody's faces during the chat.
Kate,
Oh, sorry.
oh, sorry, okay. You mentioned that the tulip tree was native here. I also grew up in New York and there were tulip trees all around there as well. How far, I mean, I'm always thinking it's so much colder up there. Are there other trees like that that can go the whole East Coast, for instance, or? So,
Tulip tree. I'm from upstate New York. Is this Lil, right?
yeah.
As you know, I'm from
I'm
upstate
sorry.
New York, and I was at a very beautiful place in upstate New York that's Zone 4, and there was tulip trees going with the what we call the cedar. Got many names. Arborvitae grows up that far north.
Yes.
Baldcypress does not. But Nyssa sylvatica, the other Nyssa that I didn't mention because it doesn't grow in the water, but it is a low-lying area. That's the Tupelo tree, grows up that far north. Lil, just see me and I'll tell you all the trees
Okay,
that grow up
yeah.
north. And I actually did a lecture for Riverwatch on all the trees that go from New England, actually some of them from Canada, all the way down to Wilmington, and they're native all the way down. And so, I mean, river birch up north, down south, there's many species. There's
Okay.
probably over 100 species that travel the coast.
Thank you.
Other questions for Kate? I mean, it's clear she has a mind like a steel trap, so now's your chance.
Hi, Kate. This is Shelley. You mentioned that the hollies do well in pairs. How do you know? I mean, can you combine different types of hollies together? Is that enough, or does it have to? You have to identify male, female of the same exact species.
Yes, you do. Unfortunately, like with a deciduous holly, Ilex verticillata, or verticillata, you need the male and the female, and you only need one male for 10 females. And some people say you only need one male for like 50 females, but there's different theories on this. I plant my hollies in the same hole. So like if I'm doing a holly that I want to cross-pollinate and produce the fruit, I'll put the male to the back, which tends to be taller, the female to the front, that tends to be wider. Isn't that true? And you do the same. Now it's a little complicated, but you do need the two, male and female, to get the fruit, and the fruit's always on the female. And some, unfortunately, times in my life, I've ordered the both of them, and they both come out female and no male. And so sometimes they mislabel them. But your nursery will be able to help you with that. If you go to Lowe's, you probably won't get the kind of help you need unless the Cooperative Extension is there assisting that day. But if you go and even talk to Cooperative Extension to their call-in line and say, I want to buy, one of the hollies, what's the male that I need to accommodate the female. And often in our neighborhoods, we've got a lot. I have one Yopon holly that was female, and it fruits every year because there's so much Yopon holly in my neighborhood. So I haven't had to buy the male Yopon. So sometimes you don't even have to bother with that.
Okay. My, I guess what I have is a female because it does have berries, but I did it through mail order and it came with the berries. So I guess I'll have to see whether it produces more.
Well, usually there's enough hollies around that it might fruit every year for you and you never have to find the male.
Okay.
But
So I'll
keep the
wait and see.
name, to keep the name of that holly so that, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hi, folks. I think I found the security that was added that was making you not able to show your faces. So if you want to show your faces, I think you're able to now. So feel free to check that again. Sorry to interrupt.
I just wanted to mention quickly that Kate typed up a Word document with all of the plant species that she mentioned in her presentation, and I just shared that document in the chat for anyone who's interested.
And during the video, I know we mentioned we'll put in the chat how to watch the video again. We won't put it in the chat because it won't be available just yet. We're gonna post it up on YouTube. It's also on Facebook. And then, as I mentioned in the beginning, if you're on our email list, this Wednesday, we will put the link to the recording in our email, which should come on Wednesday. So you'll get the link. It will be sitting in, it's basically in 3 places. So if you want to watch this and all of our First Saturday seminars, you can do it either on our website. We have a website page for First Saturday seminars. All of the seminars are on there. All during COVID are the presentations like this, where you can actually live watch the stream of the presentation. January, February, they're just the PowerPoints because one of the benefits of COVID, we get to actually have these live presentations recorded. And then also on our YouTube channel, and then Facebook will store the live stream there as well. So you can always check back. If you didn't like me, took screenshots of all the new bushes and trees that I want to buy. Any other questions for Kate?
Yes, I have a question.
Hi, Shantae. Good to see you.
I didn't Google this, and I'm not showing my face, but I'm happy. And Kate, thank you so much for the wealth of information. I have always loved crepe myrtles, and my dad, who a lot of people in my family just are gardeners. I love to garden, and I always thought crepe myrtles were beautiful, but you just educated us about how there's really not nearly as much value in the as far as they're not native to Wilmington, and there's not much value in the ecosystems that have to dwell near the crepe myrtle or on the crepe myrtle. So where are crepe myrtles more beneficial?
Well, it's not that they're not beneficial. Aesthetically, they have stunning colors and stunning even fall foliage, and they're just beautiful things. They're all from Asia. Not one of them's from our continent, not Canada, not nowhere. And so because in my neighborhood on 8th Street, there is, with the exception of my property, not a property pretty much that doesn't have one. There's not a street that doesn't have it between the sidewalk and the street. And so, I mean, if you really want to plant them. They take it dry. They also have a colonizing capability. So my neighbor has a crepe myrtle right near my fence, and in my vegetable garden I have to remove crepe myrtle's roots, which I really can't remove because there's so many of them. Mm-hmm. and they're always popping up because they're colonizers. They come from the roots all over my vegetable garden, and someday I'm just not going to have the ability to remove them all, and then it'll be a crepe myrtle colony. But it's not that it's not beautiful, and there's dwarf forms and they're stunning. I like the dwarf forms better than the tree. They're more manageable, I think. But it's just that it's overplanted. It's over-recommended. It's overdone. There's just too many of them at the party, you know? We need.
Gotcha. Do you have anything to say about sea lavender?
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's
I love
native.
Sea lavender.
I'm crazy for sea lavender. Plant all you want of that.
I also want to make a comment that I love, Kate, I love your terminology, and I was chatting with Audrey during the presentation that I'm contemplating a new Cape Fear River Watch t-shirt that says Cape Fear River, it takes it brackish. I'm really excited about this. Yeah, I have a plan. Would love if everyone could unmute themselves to honor Kate and her, you know, she's a little bit unable to see everyone. So I want to give everybody a chance because Kate, you have multiple thank yous in the chat. Everybody's saying great presentation. They learned so much. I would love if we could just give her an audio round of applause.
Thank you. And thank Audrey. Audrey, I really am. I'm really kind of blind these days. I can't see any of you. I forgot to see one of you. I don't see any of you. But Audrey, I couldn't have done this without her sitting there. And I was nervous because I usually stand near my slides. on a big screen. And here it's all on the computer. So thank you, Audrey Dunn.
Thank you, Audrey. We're so grateful for you. So with that, I want to honor everyone's time. It is 10:30. This was a wonderful presentation. If you have further questions, Kate was gracious enough to offer her email. And again, feel free to check out the presentation again online when you get that email on Wednesday from Riverwatch. Thanks, everyone, and thank you again, Kate.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. You're welcome.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome. You're welcome. Go out and make a difference. Go out and make a difference in the world. I don't tell people what to do.
Kate and Audrey, hold on one sec. Oh, they left. That's okay. Bye, y'all.
Bye.